So this year I started reading a few books, and let me tell you, it didn't start off great. Let's start with the bad and end with the good, because I don't see going the other way. It's just gonna make me sad finishing this. So I know I had finished off the year, well, not too long before the year ended last year. I had read The Only One Left by Riley Sager, and that book was so good that I was like, into the new year, I have to read another Riley Sager book. And I'm just like, let's do it. Let me go full swing. Like, I'm so excited. And then I read this one that was called The House Across the Lake. I don't know if any of you watched Tara Michelle, but she also read that after I read it. And I was like, honestly, I was screaming at the screen because I was just like, I hate that this is making so much noise. Whatever. I was screaming at the screen because I was like, oh my god, don't read that book, don't read that book, you're gonna hate your life. So I thought it was gonna be a lot better than it was because I had such high expectations when I started, and then I read this book and I was like, the expectations are gone. It's not good because it was so slow to start off, and then halfway through the book is when it got like paranormal and my brain was like, I don't comprehend what's happening. Like, this is not how I thought it would turn, and it didn't give me the vibes that I was hoping for the vibes. Because basically it's about this woman who, she's had an addiction basically all her life, but goes back and forth between addiction, and for the past, I believe, 5 years she was married to this man, and he ended up dying at the lake house of her family. And so after he dies at the lake house, she goes back into the city and starts drinking and gets kicked off of her Broadway show or whatever, and her mother sends her back to the lake house, which wouldn't that be traumatizing, but whatever, to kind of get away from the public eye and just live a calmer life. But then she sees the people who bought the new house across the lake, and it looks kind of fishy and things are going on, very Rear Window-esque, if you've ever seen that before. And so she gets into that and she thinks something's happening and something's going on. But then, like I said, it takes a very paranormal twist after that I can't tell you guys about because that's huge spoilers. And I was just like, yeah, no. If you want to read a book by Riley Sager, read The Only One Left. And if you guys know another book by him that is at that same level, please let me know, because I loved his writing in that book. And then I read this one, and I was like, I think I'm good. And then my mom read a few, and they weren't at the same level, and I was very upset, very upset. Another one that I read was Don't Let Her Stay. I had it in my TBR list for a while now, and it was by Nicholas Sanders. I don't know, I mean, I like thrillers, but at the same time, thrillers are just like, they don't do for me what I'm hoping that they're gonna do. Like, I'm waiting for something to happen. I'm like, that there's gonna be some like drama and like things are gonna happen here and there. And like, yeah, there were things that I didn't expect, but it didn't really pull my attention. And I was just kind of being like, all right, when is this book gonna be over? And when you're like that, it's like, that's not a really good book to read. So basically the preference of this book is that this woman marries this man that's a bit older than her, and she becomes pregnant and she has a baby with this man, and he had a baby. He had a kid from his previous marriage, and she's like 20, 21, and she comes to stay with them, and they became estranged because he had married somebody younger and they just didn't want to talk. But finding out that he had another kid, she was just like, all of a sudden was like, oh, I'm sorry, like, I want to be in your life again. She comes to stay with them, and then she's doing some weird messed up stuff, like psychopathic stuff. And then it goes down that path where like the girl is trying to set up the stepmom to look bad in front of the dad, and she acts like a little kid in front of the dad, and it's just like this energy, but the dad doesn't believe it. Like, of course. So you can't, like, he's like, no, she's fine, she's not doing anything wrong, it's you. Like, so much gaslighting, I can't even tell you. And then it just didn't go where I wanted it to go. And then at the end, it was like a turn and then the turn, but I was just like, that's my thought of it. It was just So I had to wait a little bit to continue filming this because my heater was screaming. So, you know, we have to save the best for last. So let's get into the books that were amazing that I read. I've literally only read 3 so far this year. I'm not like crazy reading right now, but you know what? The 3 that I've been reading right now, so good. So the first one was The 7-Year Slip. Oh my god, it was so cute. It had both magic, it had romance, it had drama. It was just the perfect little like move from a thriller to, because I always have to change genres. I always have to go from being like, okay, this was romance, and then this was fantasy, and then this was thriller, and then like move back and forth because I need a different vibe all the time. So I read this one and I was like, it was so good. For me, so I'm getting so excited I can't even speak correctly. So it was very easy for me to read. I went through it super quickly and it just kept me interested and kept me thinking about the book, and it took me a few days to start a new book because I just kept thinking about it, and it was so cute. So basically what it is this girl, she kept visiting her aunt in New York City. She was up on the Upper East Side, and in her flat she would visit her throughout her childhood, and her aunt would always tell her stories about the apartment and how it's magical, and how she had met somebody through the apartment because the apartment, it slips either 7 years in the past or 7 years in the future. And her aunt said, oh yeah, I met this woman and this and that, but it never worked out between us. And so years later, when the aunt passed away, the girl, her niece, inherited the apartment and started living there. And she's like dreading it. She doesn't love living there, but she always has in the back of her mind that it's magical, even though I think it's more of a hope than it actually being what it is, until it actually happens to her and she slips 7 years in the past, and she basically falls in love with the guy that she meets in this apartment. It just goes from there, and then she ends up meeting him in her time frame, but she ended up, oh, I can't even, I wanted to say something else, but I can't, and it's so cute, and it was a good change, and it was definitely a 5 stars. So it's definitely good from like a 2-star to a 5-star, and I was just so happy with that. The book that I just read also was Divine Rivals. So it took me a minute. It took me a good minute to actually like this book. At first I was just like, I don't think I like this book. It's not doing for me what I thought it would, because it's basically like a different type of fantasy book. It has fantasy in it, but it's not 100% fantasy world. It's very human based world. But after, God, I think it took me like half the book to really get into it. But once I was into it, I couldn't put it down. I couldn't, oh my God, then it got super interesting and I just kept reading it, and I was just like, okay, this is a 5-star book, and I'm still thinking about it, and I'm like, oh. So basically what it is they are in the midst of a war. This is taking place though in like the early 1900s. So there were points in this book where I was like, when they were like, oh, we have to use candlelight to look into the room, like, why don't you just use your cell phone? And then my brain was just like, literally, there's no phones. There's no phones. So basically they're in the midst of a war, but it's not like a regular war. It's a war between 2 gods. A underling, which is someone like basically an evil presence, and then a skyward, I think, which is like an angel or something, and they're both like fighting each other, and they enlist people. They enlist basically humans to fight each other in a war. And so basically this girl, she sends her brother off to war because he ended up going off to fight for the goddess. So she ends up dropping out of high school and she goes to work at a paper. She's always wanted to be a journalist, wants to write. So along the way some things happen that are not great, and she ends up leaving this job and going to be a war correspondent, and actually goes to the front to talk about and write about what's actually happening on the front and where people are fighting. And the guy that she met when she was at the one post, they kept going back and forth with like they're kind of enemies, but they're not enemies. Like right before she left, they were kind of corresponding magically through typewriters that were linked between the 2 of them, and they would be able to send messages to each other. and she didn't know who he was, but he knew who she was, and they ended up falling in love with each other, not knowing really who each other, well, she not knowing who he was. But when she left and went to be that war correspondent, he ended up following her because he realized that she was the one that he wanted to be with, and they go to the front and so many things happen, and I just can't tell you exactly what happens, but it's just so good. And then the book that I'm currently almost halfway through is called Ruthless Vows. So it's the second book to which I found out a 2-book series is called Duology. Ew. So basically reading the second book to the series because I needed to find out what happened, but I don't want to get into like actually what happened because I can't tell you guys. But basically it's just like, I can't even tell you guys because if you haven't read the first one, then you're not gonna know the second one. So we just can't, okay, I'm gonna say right here, there's gonna be, if you haven't read the first book, there's gonna be spoilers going into the second one. This is your warning right now, okay? So when Roman and Iris get broken up and they can't find each other anymore and Roman gets sucked into the world of the underlings, whatever, she ends up going back to Oath because Forrest takes her back to Oath. And she's there for a couple weeks and has Addie and everything, and they're working for the Ink-Ridden Tribune. Yes. And then they end up going back or trying to go back to closer where the war is and to write about it again. Her brother Forrest is not happy about it, but she's like, you know what, I'm an adult now, I'm gonna do what I want. And so she ends up going back there. And she keeps trying to find where Roman is because he's gone and she doesn't know if he's alive, she doesn't know what happened, but with what Forrest has told her, she thinks that he is alive and she's just hoping that he is. And she ends up getting the typewriter, the third Alouette, from the museum. She steals it and she ends up writing to him and hoping that maybe he still has a typewriter and he can help her. Meanwhile, Roman is alive, he's saved, but he doesn't really have his memory, but he does have the typewriter because basically Decra made him into his own writer, article writer for the paper to be published at the Oath Gazette. At the Gazette. They start talking and it's basically like the reverse now. So before Iris didn't know who was talking to her, and now Roman doesn't know who's talking to him, like they have no idea. But they ended up like helping each other out and they ended up seeing each other, and I'm not gonna go into too much detail because it's just, you need to read it, and I also haven't finished it yet, so we're not gonna spoil it for myself because I need to know what happens. Usually, like I said, I like to switch between genres, but I think I'm going full swing into the fantasy genre. I have another one that I'm thinking about, but it's a trilogy, but I think I might only read the first book first because I really want to get into the ACOTAR series. I am ready to just full send into it and I cannot wait. So that's gonna be the next plans, and hopefully maybe in a couple months I can update you guys on the books that I have read and how I feel about them, and see if you guys have read any also and what you would recommend me, because I'm always up for a book recommendation. I have like 20 books on my TBR list right now, but you know what, we will get to it. I have big plans to read so much more. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.